Hello. In this video, I will be diving into the creatures and entities inside of the Vita Carnis analog horror universe. I'll be explaining literally every single creature in the lore so far, and if you clicked on this video for like 20 minutes of nothing but entity and creature lore, then you're in the right place. If you are not familiar with the analog horror series Vita Carnis, I definitely recommend you go check out the series before watching this video, or if you just wanted to put this on in the background, be my guest. By the creator Darian Quiloy here on YouTube. This dude is super talented. I got nothing else to say. And his mind might be troubled for the things he's come up with in this video. You'll see what I mean. Essentially, and at its most base level, Vita Carnis is a speculative biology and evolutionary series that follows this strange species of entities and creatures that lives on this earth and is multiplying rapidly and eating humans. Essentially, it's like a giant spider web of these creatures all over the globe, doing different things with their different effects and their different descriptions and different behaviors and all that, and their one single goal is to consume human meat. There's a cult that wants to use these entities for bad reasons. There's a government agency called Carcass that wants to understand and describe these creatures. It all dates back to World War I, and it's just crazy. It's insane. There's hive minds, there's meat spores, there's little tiny dog flesh things that you can have as pets, and that's the most normal part of it all, actually. It's a lot. And in this video, I will be going over all of those creatures, all of those entities, and a lot of the lore as well of the Vita Carnis universe. And I think you should stick around if you enjoy that kind of thing. This is going to be a good video. If you want me to go over more analog horror series stuff like this, leave a like. I really love this sort of thing, and I hope you do as well. I can't wait to dive into this, and I hope you're excited too. Let's go ahead and get into the video, shall we? First over the video, I'm going to be discussing Trucidatum Carnis, which is Latin for butchered meat. That's right, the first creature's name is butchered meat, and every single creature I'll be talking about today has a Latin name. However, the name I'll be using is the nicknames that they've been given. For instance, this creature, the butchered meat creature, has been nicknamed Mimics, or the Mimics. The Mimic is the first hostile species in the Carnis family, and they take the appearance of large bipedal creatures with very similar characteristics to humans, specifically in their anatomy. There is one glaringly big difference though, and it's that these mimics do not have skin. They're also known for their exaggerated features as well, like having long arms or hunched legs or flat noses or massive eyes and wet, clammy meat skin. Their mouths are usually so packed with teeth that they seem to be smiling constantly. That's how many teeth are in their mouth. It kind of sticks their face in a smiling position. The teeth themselves are almost entirely incisors and canines with large molars in the very back, which is the perfect setup for biting into meat and swallowing large chunks of meat whole. Mimics can range in height to be the size of a normal adult man, but they're also known to expand and grow themselves to become more intimidating while trying to hunt people. The eyes of this creature are large and glossy, and they're known to have pretty decent eyesight, especially at nighttime. So just to catch you up to speed so far, this is a humanoid entity with no skin that's extremely aggressive and that can grow to large proportions with exaggerated features, and it also hunts humans. Now that you know the physical description, I want to dive into how these creatures came about, where they come from, and just kind of their evolutionary track. The evolution of a mimic entity can be split up into three specific stages: early life, maturity, and elder. In the early stages of life, a small mimic will come from another entity on this list known as the crawl. I will explain the crawl next. Don't worry. But when these mimic entities are born, they are small, they're thin, and they have 4 appendages. They're just tiny little meatballs with 4 legs. At this young stage, they will leave the crawl, and they will naturally begin to hunt small animals, like rabbits and birds and moles and such. They will do this until they begin to grow, and progressively they will go up the food chain and start to hunt bigger animals, like deer. When a mimic reaches the mature stage, it will start to thirst for human flesh, and it'll start to stalk and attack people because of that. If a mimic has access to a constant supply of humans to hunt and kill, it will begin to take on a more human-like appearance with its physical features. That's why they're nicknamed mimics. They sort of shadow and mimic human behavior after they hunt them for a while and after they're exposed to them for a while. After they do this enough, they will begin to to blend into society pretty well for a passing eye to see, and they'll start to hunt more selectively. Now, they don't blend in 100% though, and you can obviously still tell that they're not quite right after staring at them for a while, but if you're passing them in a bunch of people and some traffic, you likely won't be able to tell that it's a mimic. After a mimic has consistently and overabundantly eaten its supply of food, it will evolve to its final stage, the elder mimic. The elder mimics are the most violent part of this creature's evolutionary track, and they'll just get more violent the longer they live. At this point, a thick layer of flexible skin will grow around its slimy meat body, and it'll grow physically stronger as well. The skin will grow and expand as long as the mimic continues to eat humans, and more teeth will begin to form at this stage. A darker layer of skin will appear on its face, and that'll help it blend into society even more. Elder mimics have also been seen wearing clothing and hats, and at this point you really won't be able to pick one out of a lineup if they're walking among humans. That's how good they blend in. Once in this elder stage, mimics are essentially the most dangerous and formidable entity on the planet, and they are a direct and immense threat to humans in any area. Elder mimics have essentially mastered the game of hunting humans, from espionage to attacking them. They're perfect. But now that you know what they look like and their evolutionary track, how they begin and how they end, let's get into the behaviors and how they hunt and how they stalk humans. When a mimic is matured enough to hunt humans, they typically all follow the same hunting patterns or similar patterns, and it's as follows. Once they find a human that they think will be an easy meal, the mimic will go to that person's house or apartments or wherever they live, and they will contort their body to break into that place. From there, they will stalk that person and their routine from the shadows, and once the mimic thinks it's time to attack, once they think the human's vulnerable enough, they'll do so. Usually this happens when a person is sleeping or in some kind of other vulnerable position, but after the mimic attacks somebody, it will neutralize them and consume their meat until it's full. Once a mimic is full, it'll run out of the house and sprint away from society to digest that meal somewhere deep in the woods. During digestion, mimics actually stay in an idle position, and they will sit in that position until the digestion is done. Now, you can actually survive a mimic attack, and you can even spot one trying to stalk you if you pay close attention to your surroundings. You see, mimics are not perfect hunters in their mature stage. The odds of you surviving decrease as they get to their elder age, but when they're in their adolescent and maturing stage, you might be able to fight one off, and you might be able to detect them hiding. You see, mimics like to hide in strange places in houses, like in empty chests or behind curtains or in closets, and if you so happen to see it where it's hiding, the likelihood is you'll probably scare it away. In the universe of this series, there's actually been a rapid increase of the mimic population in the world, which of course threatens the existence of humanity, since that's all they do is hunt humans. And this map right here shows where mimics live, and it's pretty much everywhere. But it's not just mimics that pose a problem to humanity, because the next entity that I want to talk to you about is the entity that spawns mimics and every other thing on this list. It also started the outbreak of all these creatures in this video. You can thank it for that. Vita Carnis, or the Crawl, is probably the most important entity in the entire lore, since like I said, it started it all. Vita Carnis is Latin for climb the flesh, and this is the first ever member of the Vita Carnis family. It's the very first one in the lore, and it's also weird. So let's see what kind of freakish thing it takes to spit out the other freakish things in the video. The Crawl takes the appearance of a growth or bundle of meat-like tendrils. Each crawl is made out of a variety of veins and arteries and intestines, and it just looks like a plant made out of veins and arteries. The crawls are red in color, and they can be darker or lighter depending on what tendril you look at. These crawls expand and grow like vines or fungus, or if you've ever seen kudzu before, that's how crawls grow. The makeup of a crawl is pretty simple. There is a large primary stem on each crawl that acts as its hub or its center, and every tendril that branches off of that stem goes into the ground like roots to collect nutrients from its surroundings. The ends of these crawl tendrils have organelles inside of them that absorb water and other nutrients from the dirt and soil. That way the crawl can grow and expand and produce the creatures in this video. Each tendril has small veins and arteries that help it transfer all of that back to the main stem, and they have their own form of photosynthesis as well, where they absorb light and transfer that to energy, and in this case, life creation. Crawls themselves blend in pretty well with nature and humanity. They behave just like any other plant would, and they can actually be pretty beneficial for animals and even humans. Since crawls are made out of meaty flesh, like everything else is, they can be consumed by natural carnivores. And when crawls absorb nutrients from the soil, small nodes of meat grow off of their tendrils and fall off and transform into small entities known as trimmings and small mimics and every other thing in this video. Those small entities can also be eaten by carnivores, so that way this plant fits pretty well into the cycle of food. And they don't just fit seamlessly into the nature cycle, they also fit pretty seamlessly into the human cycle. Crawls can be cultivated by humans and grown, and you can take them and grind them up and use them as fertilizer. Ground up crawl has been pretty good at making crops grow faster and stronger. You can also grind up crawls and eat them. When you do grind up a crawl, it kind of takes the appearance of ground beef, however they do taste like liver, so do with that what you will. As I've said multiple times, crawls are the nexus of the entities in this video, but they themselves are not outright dangerous. They're actually one of the least bad. They're just vines that grow and produce the awful things that I'll talk about later, and they can be ground up and used as fertilizers. But speaking of being the least bad, let's move on to the next creature in the lore that I kind of just mentioned, the trimmings. These things are pretty cute. Vita Carnis, or the cowardly flesh or cowardly meat, as it stands for in Latin, are called trimmings in this universe. These are those little tiny meat nodes that I mentioned falling off of the crawl, and these things are pretty cool. They're actually pretty nice. So let's get into the lore. Trimmings are small, meaty, turtle-like creatures that kind of look like a skinned raccoon. Just like all the Carnis creatures, this one is made completely out of meaty tissue, thus making it a dark red color. Trimmings all look unique in their own different way. Some have spikes, some have small heads, some have big eyes, but they're all around the size of a basketball or a soccer ball. They're very passive and they're very docile, and they'll usually just run away if they perceive a threat. Probably the most unique thing about trimmings is that they're known to show intense emotions through things like chattering and screeching and screaming, and they do those things depending on how they feel. If you've ever seen a prairie dog from real life make noises, these little trimming entities are pretty similar. If they're happy, they'll start chittering and start screaming, even though it might be annoying. Trimmings are fully nocturnal, and at nighttime they wake up and they make a ton of noise. You could theoretically have a trimming as a pet, since you could just tame it with meat. They're not aggressive or anything, but they might keep you up at night since they are nocturnal, and they do the screeching thing. They're actually very annoying when they screech because they constantly do it to express their emotions. Trimmings have some sort of hive mind with other trimmings that may or may not make them feel what every other trimming feels. This is still an ongoing study inside the Vita Carnis lore, so don't take that as fact, but that'd be pretty cool if it was the case. There would be just millions of little trimmings running around the world. It's pretty cute. The life cycle of a trimming is pretty straightforward. They begin as a small ball-shaped meat node on the tendril of a crawl, and once it reaches the size of an apple, it'll fall off the crawl and begin to walk around looking for food. They'll eat just about anything off the bat, from meat to seeds to insects to dead animal carcasses, even rotten carcasses. They don't really care. In this way, they kind of behave like a raccoon, where they'll just eat whatever. Trimmings have a very, very small lifespan though, and they're considered adults at just 7 months old. At max, they typically live around 4 years in the wild, but that could be extended to about 6 to 7 to 8 years in captivity. Most of the trimmings don't even make it that far though, because they're common prey for bigger animals in the forests like bears and wolves and such. Now, trimmings are no threat to humanity. They don't really have that many bad characteristics. The worst things that they do to humans is that they annoy them due to their screeching sounds at night. But like I said, you could domesticate one like a little dog if you wanted to, and you could essentially just feed them like a dog or cat. You can give them kibble or meat. You can play tug of war. They love playing tug with toys. You can give them baths. They're just giant meat dogs, essentially. But this next creature is one that you definitely would not want to go near or have as a pet at all. Vita Carnis is next next, and that stands for to borrow or to steal flesh. Yay. In the universe of Vita Carnis, it is called the meat snake though, and that name alone should give you a hint as to what this thing's about. Meat snakes are found all over the world, but they mainly live and thrive in moderate climates. They're not too different from regular worms or snakes, they just look like giant versions of them made out of meat. They have a head and a tail, and they just look like a worm, except they usually grow to about 5 meters or 16 feet in length, which is very large. Meat snakes' main physical characteristic is that they will take the appearance of whatever they eat. And what I mean by that is when they consume something that has a skull of whatever animal that is, they will use that skull as their own. So if a meat snake kills a deer, the snake's head will change into a deer. Meat snake's skin is surrounded by a clear fleshy membrane that kind of acts like a epidermis or skin layer. If this skin layer is punctured, the snake will die. The smell of a meat snake is unmistakable though, because it has been described as awful. And by the creator of the series himself, he described the meat snake as follows. Quote, "If you put meat in a jar with apple cider vinegar and then left it in the sun for a week." End quote. That's how the meat snake smells. Now, this is the first entity on this list that has connections all the way back to World War II that we know of. And it's pretty strange, to say the least. You see, meat snakes consume whatever meat they come across. That's what they do. That's why it says to steal or borrow flesh. And during World War II, there was a lot of flesh to go around, obviously. Meat snakes were actually released into no man's land on battlefields in World War II between trenches to consume rotting soldiers that were there. Which is disgusting, I can't even lie. But it's a pretty cool part of the lore that I thought you should know. Meat snakes also heavily interest the cult that's in this universe for its digestive and consuming nature. I mean, they'll literally eat anything. Meat snakes' behavior and temperaments are pretty similar to other snakes from real life. It really won't attack unless it's provoked or threatened, or if anything tries to steal its prey. And speaking of which, meat snakes love to hunt and eat large animals, and they do so by opening their maw and swallowing whatever it is. Whole, completely whole. Its body will just extend around the shape of whatever it is to digest it, kind of like your mom. The creature has no natural predators because it's immune to most things. It's also immune to most diseases, making it invincible to the natural world, with the only ways of it being killed are by puncturing its thick membrane of skin or starvation if it can't find food. The meat snake, like I said, thrives in areas where there's lots of dead flesh, whether it's humans or creatures. So if you're in some place like that, you're likely to see a meat snake. They reproduce through mitosis, which is kind of like cloning. And once a snake reaches its full size, it will mitosify and clone itself into a new meat snake. Once this happens, 2 meat snakes will just slither off from each other as 2 different organisms like nothing happened. The good news is these things don't really pose a threat to humanity. Rather, they actually have a couple interesting benefits for us. Essentially, humans can use meat snakes like a giant garbage disposal for flesh, for meat or anything. If you have old or rotten meat that you want to get rid of, you can feed it to a meat snake. Butcher shops use them to dispose of spoiled meat. Roadkill is cleaned up by meat snakes. Dead soldiers on battlefields. All this stuff is just right up the meat snake's alley. And as disgusting and weird as that sounds, it's another not outrightly dangerous creature. There is one small anomaly with this creature though that happened in the year of 1945. During the post-World War II cleanup, a gigantic meat snake was found in the train tunnels underneath Germany. It essentially looked like an exaggerated, swollen version of a regular meat snake, and so large that it really couldn't move. Its skin was darker than usual, and it was over 30 meters long, which is 6 times larger than the usual instances of meat snakes. This snake had the head of 6 cow skulls on it, and scattered around its giant mouth were bones from humans mostly. It seems like this entity was just consuming all the bodies from that area during World War II. But I guess this instance is so far the only kind of meat snake that has grown that large, but I guess it does prove that under the right circumstance, meat snakes could grow insanely big and dangerous and eat anything in their path. Also, I was checking the giant meat snake page, and this comment is not getting off the hook for saying that. How could somebody say hear me out to this? Like, seriously, I might delete my channel after hearing that. Anyways, moving on from that disgusting comment and the meat snake, we're gonna go to a creature that is objectively horrifying. One that is finally bad without apology. Vita Carnis, or Gather the Meat, is the next creature in the order I'm doing today, and this is a very scary one, I will say. In the lore, it's known mainly as the Harvester, and you're about to see exactly why it is called that. The Harvester is located in sparsely populated areas in the cold northern hemisphere. It lives mainly in woodland areas where it can hunt prey or call prey to it, and physically it takes the appearance of a bulbous plant-like creature that looks like a fleshy egg. The bulb grows to around 3 meters or 9.8 feet in height and 2 meters or 6.8 feet in diameter. It's a very big flesh egg, and each of these harvesters has several tendrils that grow out of it that are used like octopus tentacles, kind of. The harvester is one of the more interesting species in the Carnis series because it shows a high level of intelligence. Even though it's a plant and it sits there like one, you can just see its intelligence by the way it attacks its victims, which usually are people or large animals. When prey gets in the range of a harvester, it will inject one of its tendrils into that prey's skin, causing paralysis. The prey will then fall unconscious and it will be consumed. So it kind of hunts like a spider. But once the prey is knocked out, the harvester will use a tendril to pull it underground, and that's where it'll be digested. But the harvester does spit out or excrete parts of its prey that it doesn't want, like bones and such, and these bones will typically attract more prey to come near it. Harvesters can move very, very slowly though from place to place if nutrients or prey runs out. But pretty much this is just a fleshy meat egg blob that has legs that stick itself in the ground and also grabs prey when they walk by. It's like if a Venus flytrap that also had a baby with a deadly meat-eating virus, like Vita Carnis. Harvesters are created from the crawl entity, just like everything else is, and they start out as just small meat nodes that fall off the tendrils and grow wherever they land. The good news is harvesters can be neutralized pretty easily if you just kill the main bulb part, like right in the middle, and that'll essentially cause it to pop. That only works though if you can get close enough to do so. But to cut to the chase, harvesters are just bloodthirsty. They will eat whatever comes nearby, and they typically pop up in wood areas near trails where unsuspecting hikers or animals will just walk past and get grabbed and consumed. Harvesters are not as common as some of the other creatures on this list that I've talked about today, and on that same note, the next entity is even less common, and you'll likely never come into contact with one in this Vita Carnis universe. Vita Carnis, or the Host, is the next creature, and probably the most rare one on this list. Vita Carnis stands for Empire of the Flesh, or Dominion of the Flesh, depending on which translation you go for. This one is off for sure, and it behaves very strangely, and you'll see what I mean right now. Only 2 confirmed images of the Host have ever been taken, and we really don't know too much about it as well. However, what we do know is that it is a semi-humanoid creature that looks sort of stretched and warped. Hosts have no legs, and instead of where legs should be is just one solid mass of fibrous tissues and tendrils that burrow into the ground like roots. The Host is covered in muscly meat fibers and veins, just like everything else on this list, except the Host has tissue plates that are thicker and cartilagey around its organs and vital areas. Hosts have no facial features to speak of, and where a face usually would be, instead there is a smooth nub. No eyes, no mouth, or anything. On the back of the Host, there are mounds of pores that take the appearance of hairs. These hairs are where the Host attacks its prey from, and it's really the most dangerous part of it. From these pores, the Host will release a cloud of spore-like aerosol into the air for the wind to carry away. If a spore from the Host floats over to prey, like a human or an animal, and that prey breathes the spore in, it will cause the prey to get very sick. There'll be headaches and dizziness and impaired speech, and overall you're just collapsing internally. You're pretty much like melting inside. After about 6 hours of these effects, the prey will then inexplicably begin to walk towards towards the direction of whatever host sent that spore. Once it gets there, the host will then gut and kill its prey and consume it by using its tendrils to pull it towards its stump trunk area. That one thick, meaty fiber area that goes into the ground kind of functions like a tree trunk, and that's where the prey will be consumed from. Now, interestingly enough, you can actually combat the effects of the spore by getting medical attention immediately, and if you do, you'll live. The host spends the majority of its time rooted in the grounds of the wilderness near the Hudson Bay area in Canada, or in the other cold woods up there. But it can slowly move if it needs to, if there's no prey or anything. But due to its hunting pattern and its dangerous carnivorous tendencies, and the fact that it can hunt from so far away using the spores, it has been classified as one of the most dangerous entities in this lore. However, again, it is somehow not nearly as scary or terrifying as the next creature on this list, the monolith. Yes, somehow even a small meat tree that releases spores and then makes people sick and then consumes it is not scary at all compared to this next thing. Vita Carnis is next, and this thing is by far the largest entity that I'm going to be talking about in this video. It's known as the monolith. Now, Vita Carnis stands for heaven of meat, or meat of heaven, and you'll see why. It's because the meat is so tall it rises to heaven. You get it? This thing is extremely disturbing if you have megalophobia, so be warned. Standing at over 120 meters tall, or 394 feet, this gigantic meat tower is really horrifying to look at. It's only been seen a few times though, and it's all in the same area. The area in question is located inside the Hudson Bay of Canada, and that is the only place on Earth where the monoliths have been seen. Monoliths are made out of tightly woven meat fibers that branch down into extremely thick arms and legs. Its legs act like sort of tree trunks in a way to keep them tight to the ground, and it makes them nearly impossible to move or to displace. The monolith's head is probably its most unique feature because it takes the shape of a ring with an empty center. There's no mouth, no face, and even though there's none of that, it can still produce an extremely loud and honestly terrifying roar. And this roar itself is pretty enigmatic because it seems to have the same effect as an EMP grenade would, which disables modern technology and vehicles in its vicinity. So if the monolith decides to vocalize, that's what happens. Monoliths have been found so far to be typically stationary and idle on that island in the Hudson Bay, and they're all standing around another entity on this list known as the Singularity, which I'll talk about next, but these monoliths are in a circle on the island surrounding it. The monoliths themselves have only been active one single time, which I'll get into in a second, but during that time, when they were active, they pretty much caused a nationwide panic, and you'll see why when I get to it. The monolith attacks using its large appendages to swipe at its opponents, and the noise it makes, like I said, acts as an EMP blast, so that disables technology, and they're also just giant, so they're pretty much invincible. On top of that, they have these insane regeneration capabilities as well, and they seem to be able to heal pretty much instantly. When the monoliths became active, there was a rocket that was fired at one of their legs, and once the rocket went through the leg, the flesh regrew almost instantly in just a couple seconds. There is no information on if the monoliths came from the crawl, since it would be harder since they're so big, and we do know that monoliths do not reproduce themselves, they kind of just exist. But this leaves their origin story as a complete mystery. Monoliths are a very dangerous thing to humanity, and they pose a massive threat with all their abilities I just mentioned. They have an EMP grenade coming out of their mouth. They can't be destroyed because they regenerate themselves, and they're huge, standing at over 394 feet tall. What can you do about that? Now, the time when they became active only happened once several years ago, and randomly, without notice and without cause, they began walking towards the nearest city in northern Canada. Obviously, this caused mass panic, and that's why the military shot rockets at it to see what it was doing. But after the rocket was shot at it, it turned around and went back to the island. Since then, they've been dormant, standing around and kind of guarding a singularity that's there. These monoliths are sort of like meaty, fleshy redwood trees from real life, and they really just give megalophobia vibes because of how large they are and how half their body is obscured by clouds because they're so big. But even though these things give megalophobia, even though they're so powerful, I'm gonna move on to the last creature on this list, which is the most important one. Even more important than all the ones I've just mentioned. The Singularity, or Vita Carnis, is the most powerful and most enigmatic creature that I'm talking about today. Even more powerful than the monolith, even more enigmatic than the mimics. This takes the cake, I think. Vita Carnis means truth of the flesh in Latin, and very, very little is known about this creature, but what I do know, I'll tell you about right now. Across the entire expanse of the known world, there are 7 singularities floating in the sky. The main one, being in the Hudson Bay, is the biggest and most revered and studied. That's the same one that the monoliths are standing around a circle to guard. These singularities have very, very high levels of intelligence and seem to be very cerebral in their actions. This is where that cult that I mentioned at the very beginning comes into play, and in the world of Vita Carnis, this cult tries to study and worship these singularities. The cult has been trying to gather all of these singularities together to perform some kind of ritualistic sacrifice to them and serve these meat god overlords. Now, this cult's been doing these rituals and seances for years, and recently in the new lore, it's gotten even crazier. There's a resistance group in the Vita Carnis universe known as Carcass, which stands for Containment and Research Consultant Association Society. That group has been tasked with trying to decipher and record and study the entities in the lore that I mentioned today, and when they got wind of this cult performing sacrifices to them, they investigated it and they ended up invading the ritual, and they gunned down the cult members. So just so I don't lose you here, there is a cult in this meat universe that worships monsters made out of meat flesh and their spawn, and a government research agency known as Carcass found them sacrificing things to these meat gods, and then they shot them all. Got it? Well, they didn't shoot them all, a few got away, but you know what I'm saying. Anyways, back to the singularity itself. Singularities are spherical in shape, and they're made out of some sort of dark mineral that is meaty but kind of glows from the inside. They're all about 1 meter or 3.3 feet in diameter, and they float around in the air without any propulsion. They don't have any rockets, they don't have any force holding them up, they're just there. The entity emits very strange forces as well, like energy signatures and magnetic fields that mess up with instrumentation around it, so you can't really study it very well. The reason we know the singularity is sentient and smart and calculated in what it does is because they emit radio signals that cannot be decrypted by human technology. Now, if you remember what I said earlier, when I talked about the entity known as trimmings, I told you how they'd like to listen to the radio and listen to music. It's thought that it's because the trimmings can understand what these singularities are broadcasting through the radio waves, and somehow they enjoy it and they're listening and conveying the messages to the other meat monsters. The crawl entity also has been seen growing up the side of radio towers and communication towers as well, which means they too could absorb radio waves and signals that these singularities send out. And what grows from the crawl plants? Pretty much every entity I've talked about today grows from crawls, so they can convey the message of whatever the singularity wants. At this point, you can really see how the creatures are all connected and perhaps led and controlled by the singularity. Since it talks through radio waves, and since crawls can grow on radio towers and talk to trimmings, and every other thing on this list grows off of the crawls, they're kind of embedded naturally with whatever the singularity wants them to do. There are just 7 singularities, like I said, which means there's one for each continent on this world, which means they kind of have dominion over the entire Earth, constantly connecting and talking to their meat spawn in the woods and in society. Singularities actually lack the ability to defend themselves, though, and one singularity has actually been detained by the Carcass group inside of a lab, and it hasn't tried to do anything to escape. It kind of just lets itself be studied. So who knows why it's doing that? It could be for some nefarious reason. It could be trying to control the minds of the people. I don't know. But besides what I just said, little is known about the singularities. They're just meat spheres, they glow, emit radio waves, and they might be controlling or mind controlling the entire Vita Carnis universe. Did they create the Carnis entities? Do they control them? Where'd they come from? Are they alien? We don't know. But you know what they are, so that's all that matters, right? But those are all of the entities, the main creatures from the Vita Carnis universe explained, and all their lore explained as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this kind of video. If you want more like this, please hit like. I would be really glad to do so. I love making videos on analog horror and describing creatures and lore and that kind of thing. This is such a cool series. Go check it out in the description. It's awesome. One of the best analog horror series in the recent years. I would love to do more series like the Mandela Catalog, like the Mystery Fleshman National Park. And anything like that. So if you want to see that, please leave a like. This video took a long time to make and research, so I really do hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much for watching to the end. If you did watch to the end, you're awesome. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for everything you do. If you want to follow me on my social media, it's down in the description below. Twitter, Instagram. I have another channel called Spoogly as well. I'm everywhere. What can I say? I'm running out of things to say for this outro. So without further ado, I'm going to end off the video here. I appreciate and love you all. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.